everyone. I wanted to do this video to really talk about the altering of the Democratic Party in the last several years and perhaps even decades. Now, before I begin, I want to make this very clear. I'm critical of both parties, but the Democratic Party has really gone insane in the last several years. Let's talk about what the Democratic Party used to be. Let's go back several decades ago. During the New Deal, during the Progressive era, this was a party about helping working families, strengthen the middle class, reduce income inequality, fight Wall Street. They reinstated Glass-Steagall. They were about making sure that the consumers were protected, that we have good health and safety standards. This was happening heavily during the New Deal and decades and afterwards. But then later on, I think in the 1960s, we started to see some factors change in the game. We saw the increasing of the welfare state. We saw them change our immigration law, the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. And by the way, the demographics would have still changed even without the law. So-called diversity that has been promoted in the 1960s, the growth of more government agencies, which led to the rise of public employee unions, more environmental consciousness. So we started to see some changes. As we move forward into the 1990s, a lot of people were not happy with the so-called Reagan, Bush, Nixon version of trickle-down economics. So they elected Bill Clinton. But in fact, what really ended up happening was the Clintons, as well as the other neoliberal Democrat politicians, they failed on their promises. They signed NAFTA, the China trade, which encouraged more outsourcing, increasing our trade deficits. They helped increase inequality a lot more, not to mention the fact that they deregulated Wall Street through the gutting of Glass-Steagall. What we have seen is that the neoliberal factions come through. And then as we go on into 2000s, we look at the typical Democratic Party platforms. We want to bring our troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan. We want to stop the tax cuts for the rich. The Patriot Act is reducing our civil liberties. And we see that the elections of 2000 and 2004 were certainly rigged. Okay, the inequality is so high. You know, rich people are running the world. Gas prices are too high. But now you see that the Democratic Party today has definitely flipped. Now they say, oh, you have to accept the election results. Oh, now we have to reduce our liberties all in the name of saving the earth and making sure that we control the pandemic. Now they don't really talk so much about the growing inequality as much as they used to. They don't seem to realize that a lot of their politicians that they support provide tax cuts for the rich. And not to mention bombing other countries. And then you see the right wing. They have changed over time. More of them have been fighting against corporate interests. Let's take a look and really get to the heart of how did that change. And that is mainly through identity politics. Now, as you know, one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders in 2016 was very popular was because he was trying to bring back the Democratic Party what it used to be. The problem is that he later caved into identity politics, and of course that is what made Hillary Clinton to a certain degree successful in that primary, because they focus on so much on race, gender, all these different variables. And one of the reasons that's really helped that is a changing voter base. One obvious factor is demographic change thanks to massive immigration along with our higher birth rates. So as you know, back in 2012-ish or so, Obama realized, okay, well, in order to get the Hispanic vote, he had to lower the number of deportations. And therefore, in order to get more voters into their platform, they realized, okay, they're abandoning the middle class, they're abandoning the things that protect their interest against large corporations and the wealthy elites. So in order to buy in to their corporate wealthy elite power structures, the Soroses, the Steyers, the Bloombergs, and all these people, Wall Street buffoons, they have to create a voter base. So this mass immigration, this identity politics, helped fuel their base. They got their replacement vote. So when many people fled the Democratic Party, The new immigrants, the anchor babies, the amnesties, the green cards, which later turned into citizenship, that of course increases their voter base. Not to mention, you'll see that the universities played a role, the media played a role in brainwashing people into accepting cultural Marxism. So many of the progressives that, of course, were solely focused on corporate power, they left the party, they vote third party, or maybe some of them have voted for Trump. We don't know. But you've seen how the party has changed over time. And you've seen, not to mention, how one of the worst examples of this outcome is the state of California. And now you see all these higher taxes, companies fleeing the state, people don't have a very good view of the way things are running, and people are fearing, well, this is going to happen in Nevada, Arizona, Texas, all these other states across the country. And they increasingly play more guilt and anti-white mentality, all about hating white people. This goes in the roots back in the 1960s, but accelerated, especially in the last few years, to serve the corporate masters. They want to say that blacks are suffering, Latinos are suffering, all because of so-called white supremacy. And not to mention hating white people, but hating white males. Now, it is true that, yes, a lot of white males are very wealthy, they have a lot of power, like Jim Murren.
Change laws. How easy is it to change a law in New York State? I don't know. But when you're the largest employer and the largest taxpayer in the state of Nevada, we can get laws changed pretty quickly. And we regularly do it.
And a lot of them are still politicians, but they fail to realize that the average white person has suffering a lot in the last several decades. And they use the race card to basically attack the police, to gather more minority voters, that the police is racist. They want to gut the Constitution. They want to reduce and destroy our traditions in America.
You know, not everything that merely alludes to another culture is racist or cultural appropriation. Really. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Halloween was always fun because it wasn't PC. Not being PC is almost the whole point of the holiday. But now everything has to turn into a federal case of snowflakes versus humor. And then some cultural studies professor will go on TV to try to explain his outrage, and Tucker Carlson will look at him like this. The majority of America is with the Democrats on the issues. They just find the woke people irritating as hell. In a new poll, 80% of Americans find political correctness to be a problem, including 75% of African Americans, 74% of Americans under 30, 82% of Asians, 87% of Hispanics, 88% of Native Americans. If you're not a statistician, let me break those numbers down for you. Nobody likes you.
All the things that are named after, they have to be gutted, the Constitution, and they want to have an attack on Christianity in this country. They also want to attack the family. They always want to say, okay, the nuclear family, especially whites, is somehow oppression, is white supremacy. Like, women should not obviously go in and get married in their low 20s. They should just spend a lot of time pursuing careers in colleges and rank up student loan debt and sleep up with so many number of guys. We're also told that males should be emasculated, that gender should change, that genders, a male and female, is oppression. And they inflate this whole LGBT community to create a wave of identity politics, children wanting to choose their genders. You have to really understand what this is all happening. It's all about divide and conquer.
Race, religion, ethnic and national background, jobs, income, education, social status, sexuality, anything you can do, keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank.
Does anybody remember when conservatives were the ones with the sticks up their asses? We went from yes we can to oh no you didn't.
Destroy the traditions of the country, so that gives the masters, the elites, the power structure, more energy to essentially control us. Now, if they claim that there's so much white supremacy, well then why don't we just break up the country, for heaven's sakes? You know, maybe the white supremacists could have their own separate country in present-day Idaho, Nebraska, or wherever. But the reason why they don't want to do that is because they need those so-called people to fulfill the system, to pay taxes and all of that. They need to make sure that, yes, they have all these government programs, a $15 an hour minimum wage, all these subsidies and everything, which, again, I do think, like I mentioned earlier in this video, government programs can work, but they don't solve the heart of the problems. Like, they talk about housing as being so unaffordable, but they're not telling you that construction is very low, and that's why we're seeing a lot of the problems that we have today. They say, oh, they're for science and everything, but they're against, males being masculine, females being feminine. We have to raise our taxes to save the earth, while these elites are not following the procedures, just like the whole pandemic procedures that they were supposed to follow. This is just a really, really sad, disgusting part about all this. And again, this can only continue if the debt is accumulated, ranked up over time, and we're seeing that the debt to GDP ratio is escalating. We're seeing the bond yield starting to go up. This is really starting to crack up. And all these goals of spending, mass importing, people from failed countries, all of this has definitely a brick wall. And not to mention technology, because they depend on these low-skilled arrivals to feed the beast, is really going to hit a cliff, because we're starting to see that it's going to be harder for them to get jobs, and they have to obviously get more government programs to support it. But do you think it's going to be that easy? Perhaps not. So other than that, it's just really disgusting to see the downfall of the Democratic Party. And I really want to make sure that you get this out to a lot of your friends and families. Please like, share, subscribe, and get this to your progressive people, because I know a lot of progressive people are sick of corporate power. We see a lot of progressive, perhaps, channels like America's Lawyer on RT, but I think they need to really understand that identity politics and all these wedge issues are getting in the way so that we don't fight the corporate beasts.